Have you ever wished you could sit down and talk with an expert before changing your PC software? Well, I'm about to do just that. I'm Janet Duke, and I'm on my way to see David Barnes, one of IBM's top spokesmen for OS2 Warp. He's agreed to help me get ready to just add Warp to my PC.
Hi, Janet. How are you? Great. Come in.
David, let me tell you why I ask for your help. If I were to describe myself as a PC user, I would say I'm application knowledgeable but operating system leery. I do not like to edit my config.sys file, but I've installed a lot of applications. I even teach other people how to use them. I'm looking at OS2 Warp and I'm interested in it, but I know enough to know there are probably some things I ought to think about before I start. So I came to you. One of my first questions is, which Warp? Because there's more than one.
That is a perfect starting question. And I'll show you with the aid of the boxes how we package OS2 Warp so the average user can see it on the shelf. OS2 Warp red box, OS2 Warp blue box. The very first one that we released was the red box. And what you'll notice is it says enhances your existing DOS and Windows. And this is real important. There are millions of PCs out there that come preloaded with DOS Windows on them. Well, they want to do the 32-bit multitasking OS2 provides. This installs on top of your Windows and still runs your Windows programs.
So it uses what's already on your system.
And it keeps what's already on your system so you can safely go back to the DOS Windows environment that you started with in case you have any problems.
That's good.
Then what we introduced, for those people that didn't already have Windows but wanted to run Windows programs, OS2 in the blue box. It is still the same Windows, exactly. But what we've done is we've packaged it in here so it's one easy install program, and it's a little bit easier to get it on your system because it's all part of the overall package.
So the blue is everything in one place.
Absolutely. Now, both of these will run your DOS and Windows programs as well as your OS2 programs. That's real important. Both of them also come with a thing called the bonus pack. This allows you to, it's got a word processor in it, spreadsheet, database, a bunch of applications to get you started, and dial-up communications so that I can dial the internet, I can dial a bulletin board, or I can dial up to CompuServe. And that's in either package.
So this I can use to get on the internet with the basic Warp packages. So what's in Warp Connect?
Now that's the third one. That's OS2 Warp Connect. This comes in either red or blue, so either with Windows or without Windows in it. What Warp Connect provides you is the ability to connect in a local area network. Now, this is really important is in a small business. In fact, my home is sort of my business, and I've got several machines connected here. I've got Warp Connect on these machines, and I can share modems, which is very important, share printers, share CD-ROM devices, and share disk drives amongst the computers here at home, but I don't have to install a server. Now, if I'm in an environment where I do have a server, Warp Connect will connect to an NT server, an OS2 LAN server, a Novell server.
So it has client code for the LANs.
In a large enterprise, in a small office, or even in a home office, Warp Connect is the one to connect in a LAN.
So if I'm sharing on any kind of a system, resources, or on a LAN, I need Connect. But any of them can get me into the internet. And at home, if I'm a standalone system, I'd probably use regular Warp, either red spine or blue spine.
Absolutely. Okay.
I know that these operating systems, the 32-bit operating systems, make the most of the new hardware. But how can I tell if my hardware is ready to run Warp?
It's a very good question. And you're right, they do take advantage of things in your hardware that you might not have used before. So you immediately say, oh, the operating system is broken, when in fact, we're trying to do things with hardware your hardware might never have done before. We created a thing called Just Add OS2 Warp, and it installs on your machine, whether it's a DOS Windows machine, a Windows 95 machine, or an OS2 machine. And one of the things that's included in here is an advisor. It'll go and look at your hardware and tell you if it's capable of running OS2.
So I install it like an application, it inspects my system, and I'll know if I can run it before I ever start loading the diskettes for Warp.
And it is an
Good.
application, and it installs very easily. Just one command puts it out on your hard disk, and then you run it. In fact, can we take a look?
I'd love to.
Great. The version that I have here, I had it installed in my system. It took a look at what was available on my system, installed it, put an icon out on the desktop, and in fact, let me launch it here. Immediately, it gives me some information on why I might want to upgrade to OS 2 and how OS 2 is different from other operating systems. But my favorite part is the Warp Advisor. The Warp Advisor will go ahead and run and take a snapshot of my system resources, and it lists the system resources here for me. It tells me if I passed or failed, and if I did fail, why. If we take a look here, well, my system is certainly big enough. It's a 486, and I've got a check mark in the pass-fail column. My memory is enough. I've got 40 megabyte.
40 meg.
I get mine free. My disk space, now there's an alarm over in the disk space in the pass-fail column that says I do not have enough disk space on my C drive. It says the minimum is 35 megabyte, and the recommended here is 80 megabyte.
And the C drive is where you normally install your operating system.
That's the way people usually think. In fact, OS 2 Warp can install on any drive. So if I take a look here, click over, it looks at my D drive, says, hey, there is enough space there. And if you'll notice, down here at the bottom, it gave a check mark that says I am, in fact, now Warp ready.
I see almost every part of my system there, but there's one that's missing. I have a CD-ROM on my PC. Will it check and see if my CD-ROM is compatible with Warp?
That's a very good question. CD-ROMs and sound cards, they've become pretty common now on most PCs. So if you select the multimedia icon here, it'll check your sound card and determine what the sound card is, and if OS 2 has a driver, it's fine. But what we discovered with a CD-ROM device, we can't just go out there while you're running underneath Windows or Windows 95 and check your CD-ROM without possibly corrupting your data.
Don't do that.
We don't want to do that.
Thank you.
And we can't do it, and neither can any other operating system. So what we've done instead is we included a list of all of the CD-ROM devices that OS 2 supports. See if your CD-ROM is on the list. If not, you can either call the manufacturer to get a new device driver, go online to get a new device driver, or you could install OS 2 from diskette.
Just to make sure, because this is like an application, what's the prereq on my system to be able to run this upgrade advisor?
Oh, okay. The Just Add Warp package requires 6 megabyte of hard disk space, and as far as a PC, if your PC can run DOS Windows, it can run the advisor. The good news is it also comes with an uninstall program, so when you're done with the advisor, it'll clean up after itself and erase itself off your system.
So my system is ready to install, except I don't have the CD-ROM driver. Can you show me how to pull that down from the bulletin boards?
First of all, let me say that OS 2 Warp is very well supported on all online media. The internet, bulletin boards, IBM's bulletin boards, CompuServe, etc. What I decided I wanted to show was CompuServe as a connection because it's something that everybody can get access to very easily, and it's got a nice user interface that'll explain how we do things. Now, OS 2 Warp actually comes with CompuServe Information Manager. Some people call it SIM. There is also a SIM for Windows, and it looks exactly the same. So you could be in a Windows environment, use that CompuServe Information Manager, or any other tool for that matter, connect to CompuServe. In fact, let's go ahead and select Connect here. It's going to find my modem, dial out, connect to CompuServe, and then we'll go from there.
So it doesn't matter the tool as long as I can get to the right bulletin board.
And what might very well be the case is you need to get out and get this driver before you've ever installed OS 2 Warp. So yes, you might want to use a DOS Procom or QModem or one of the many programs that have been around for years. You can use any of those to access an online service.
Or a neighbor like you.
Or a neighbor if you've got one, absolutely. Now, we've just connected. It's as simple as that. We are connected now onto CompuServe. My menu is customized, so I just click here, and it takes me to the OS 2 forums. But instead, I'll do a common command for people. On CompuServe, you say go, and in this case, I'll say OS 2 SUPPORT. So I just want to go OS 2 support.
One word, no space.
That's it. You could also select go IBM OS 2. One word, no space, and it'll show you all of the IBM OS 2 forums. So this one is actually taking me out into that forum on CompuServe now, and this forum is for no other purpose than to support OS2. Over here on the right side, there's the magnifying glass with the books. Select that, and it says Search for Files. And you said you had a Mitsumi drive?
Right.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and select MITSUMI, and I only want to see new drivers. So I'm going to say from 1195. And I'm just going to go ahead and select Search. And now CompuServe Information Manager goes out to CompuServe, searches in our whole support forum, and here we've actually found two, OS2 Warp CD-ROM replacement, and here's one specifically for the Mitsumi drive. Actually, I want to look at the first one. I'll just select Description, and it'll give me information about the driver. This says that this one works for Sony, Mitsumi, Philips, Sound Blaster. I could select this or one of the others. This one looks good. I click on Retrieve, tell it where I want to put it. In this case, I'll just put it in my D drive in the root. Select OK, and the file transfer begins. And in this case, about 3-4 minutes, I'll have the new driver on my hard disk.
Are new drivers posted here periodically?
CompuServe's forum is absolutely current. If a new driver becomes available, it's almost always on CompuServe. But CompuServe costs money. There's other less expensive ways, often the internet, and the new drivers make them out there as well.
And IBM posts it there, or do the vendors put their own drivers out?
Both. There are drivers that are created by IBM. There are drivers that are created by hardware vendors. And usually you'll find out in the README file that comes along with it, both how to install that driver and who manufactures and who supports the driver.
So if I got a new piece of hardware, let's say I upgraded my CD-ROM, this is the same place I'd go to get my new device driver for that.
You can call the manufacturers as well, but sometimes this actually makes a more cost-effective way for both you and the manufacturer, and you can usually get things a little bit quicker. And that's it. That driver's been downloaded. It's on our hard disk now. Now I would go to that driver and read the README file that came with it to determine how to install that specific driver.
David, if I don't yet have a way to dial in from my computer, and I understand once I have Warp, the software's there, but is there any other way I can get information about Warp without dialing into a network?
Absolutely. With OS2 Warp, you get a fax program. You can probably use one with your Windows programs or others as well if you have a fax modem. Let me show you very quickly how we'd run it in OS2 Warp. Very simple. You select fax. I want to receive an either one call or all calls. In this case, I'll say I want to receive all calls. My fax program is now waiting for a phone call. If I dial up IBM's fax-back service, and it's 1-800-IBM-4-FAX, I just listen to the prompts, and it says, what do you want information on? And if I want OS2 information, I push a number, and it says, where do you want it sent? I give it this phone number, and down comes the information. You don't have to be at a fax machine. If you know your office fax number, you can dial it up, ask for information on all OS2 outstanding problems, and say, fax it over to my local fax machine, put in the phone number, and it comes to that fax machine, and it's free of charge.
And they send you a directory of the information that's up there?
Absolutely. In fact, one of the first things you can do is pull down information on how to use the fax service. And this gives you information on how to use it. And one of the neatest things is you can go and select a navigation map. So what I did is I went on to 1-800-IBM for fax. I said, send me instructions on how to use the fax-back service. I printed this just on my local laser printer. It comes out of my fax program. And one of the things it shows you is a navigation map. And this is how to use the fax-back service, not just for OS2, but for all IBM products, AS400, large systems, etc. So this will teach you how to use the fax-back service. Now you say, I want a list of all of the things that are out there. It'll send it to your local fax machine.
So I can call from my home, request the fax I want, and have it sent either to my office or the copy shop down the street.
You can have it sent to any fax machine.
I know there are a lot of considerations when you put an operating system on about how to handle your hard file. Could you talk to me a little bit about whether I should back up what I have and also about partitioning?
There are definitely things to consider when you're going to put OS2 on your hard disk. Partitioning, first of all. Now, partitioning, remember, one physical hard disk in my computer, but I can make it into a C drive or a D drive or an E drive. That's partitioning. You don't have to, although I recommend it. Most people that use OS2 would recommend it. What we like to do is we like to keep the operating system separate from your applications. So I'd put OS2 in C, for instance, and put my applications in D. And by the way, when I do that, I usually leave about 100 megabyte for my C drive for all of my OS2, and then the rest for my applications. I like it because if I ever want to go back and reformat C to reinstall OS2 or to do something with it, I can do that without affecting my applications. Because remember, when you format, you lose your data.
So you don't have to reinstall every application just because you reinstall an operating system.
Now, doing that is not required. If you have your hard disk the way you like it, you can put OS2 on that way. It is not required. Another reason you might want to partition, and again, this requires losing data and restoring your data, is a thing called the boot manager. That means I could have OS2 and any other operating system on my machine, choose between them. It's rather complex, but it's well explained in the Getting Started manual that comes with OS2.
With DOS and Windows, I've always used the FAT file system. That's what's standard. But I know there are high-performance file systems, and I know that Warp uses one. Why would I use one versus the other?
The FAT file system has served us well over many, many years, but our computers have grown up, and our hard disks are bigger, and the FAT file system is not an efficient way to use your new 1 gig hard disk. The high-performance file system gives us 254 character file names, 254 character directory names. You can, if you use that high-performance file system, still store data to a diskette, share it with your DOS users, copy data and share it with your DOS friends, right? But if I boot up DOS from a diskette, it cannot see that high-performance partition. So that's something you want to consider. I like it in an environment where I start out with one high-performance partition, learn to use it, and if I like it, then I grow. I've grown now to where I use no FAT file system. I haven't for years. But a good way is to start out small, try it, and then grow from there.
What about using dual boot? Why would I set my system up to boot DOS and Windows as well as OS2 Warp?
I will tell you, in my opinion, dual boot for a home user is an absolute necessity. In most home environments, you're going to have some DOS game that doesn't run well under OS2 or under Windows 95 or under Windows NT or under any operating system.
It just runs well under DOS.
Under straight DOS. In fact, these new programmers, they don't even use DOS for the most part. They just use your hardware. For that reason, dual boot allows me to take my OS2 system, click on an icon, go back to pure DOS, nothing else on the system. And when I want to get back to OS2, I type in boot space OS2, and it brings me back to OS2. And it's automatic. When you install OS2 on a DOS Windows machine, you automatically have dual boot.
But doesn't that take up additional room on your hard file to set up a dual boot?
No, absolutely not. Because you already have DOS and Windows, and then OS2 gets installed, you don't need any additional space. It's just going back to your DOS Windows. So no additional space required. In fact, it's automatically there on every install.
I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to ask you my questions, but I also know I probably don't know all the questions to ask. What are some questions I may have missed that a user ought to think about before they install Warp?
A few things. Disk compression. It's one of the big questions we're always asked. Can I take my DOS Windows machine that has double space on it or some other compression utility and install OS2 Warp on top of that? The immediate answer would be no. What you can do is you can get Stacker for OS2 and DOS. And they make a product that allows me to use dual boot. It works under DOS and OS2 environment, and it'll take care of my double store or other utilities and convert them for me so that I can get over and run in an OS2 environment. But if the product is not an OS2 compression product like DCF2 or Stacker, the answer is no. OS2 will not install on top of that. And the other thing I wanted to tell you about, and I've done this myself, and that's why I want to mention it, OS2, when installing on a DOS Windows machine, will ask you for your Windows diskettes. You say, well, wait a minute, David, I thought it installed on top of and used your Windows. It does, but it may very well need some fonts or some drivers off your Windows diskettes. So when you get in the middle of the install program, it may ask you for Windows diskette number 3. So you want to make sure you know where they are, because if you're like me, you probably misplaced them.
So it'll prompt me for the diskette it needs, but I need to have them on hand as I'm installing.
Absolutely. And if you have a machine that came preloaded with Windows, the diskette images are very possibly on your hard disk. A lot of vendors ship them that way. So you may want to create the diskettes off your hard disk before you start the OS2 install.
It's really interesting. David, something that would be very helpful to me is if you could talk me through the decisions that come up on the screen as I go through the installation. I know the first one that came up was, do I want the easy install or the advanced install? If I've run the Warp Advisor and I know my hardware is ready for Warp, can I just take the easy install?
Actually, yes, you could, but that's not the purpose of the easy install, advanced install. The purpose is to allow you to put OS2 on another partition or do something else with the install. Where do I want to put OS2, or how do I want to put it on? When you select easy install, OS2 says, okay, you want to go to the C drive, use the existing file system, and here I go. If you select advanced install, OS2 gives you choices. Would you like to switch to a different file system, HPFS or FAT? Would you like to put OS2 on another partition other than C? By default, OS2 is going in your C drive. If you would like to put it in your D drive, you have to select advanced install. And the other thing it'll allow you is to choose the boot manager. And that would require repartitioning your hard disk. Repartitioning means losing data, which means you have to back up. But the boot manager allows you to have multiple operating systems on the same computer. And when you boot up OS2, your PC, you get to choose which operating system to start. It could be 2 different flavors of OS2, version 2 and Warp, or it could be Windows NT and OS2. And the boot manager will allow you to choose that. And to use it, you have to select advanced install.
So advanced install is what I use if I need to change my partitions in some way, change the file system, or I want to install OS2 Warp to run other than in the C drive. Talk me through some of the things we see once the install actually begins.
After that choice has been made, easy install and advanced install become the same. The screen that you see next, this is the system configuration screen. This is where OS2 has determined this is what I think your hardware is. You have a chance to change it, or you have a chance to install support for some hardware that I didn't see. For example, very often OS2 won't see your printer. Maybe you've got to power it off, or your CD-ROM drive. Maybe you've got to power it off. But you can add them here. Notice it didn't find my CD-ROM. Mine's in a docking station, and I'm not connected right now. So I could select CD-ROM device. Mine happens to be this IBM CD-ROM here, but we were talking about the Mitsumi before. I could just select here M, will take me to those things starting with M, and right there it is. Notice I can select support for more than one. So if I have multiple types of CD-ROM devices, this is the place to select them. By the way, remember, these things that I'm showing you, you can get back to these after install as well. So if you forget this during the install, you can always get back here. You just go to your System Setup folder and select Selective Install, and you're back at the screen. Also, selecting printers the same way. Pick the printer, and again, multiple printers can be selected for different ports. And I'll also show you in a little bit how to add a printer driver after the fact, because that's very important.
So the same process I'm using here to install Warp, I would later use if I upgraded my CD-ROM or if I bought a different printer.
Absolutely. You go out this weekend, you buy a new CD-ROM, you come home, you stick it on, you bring up Selective Install, you select CD-ROM device, and select the CD-ROM or printer, etc. Okay. Now, before I leave here, I do want to also point out this can be got to from your Selective Install button in your system folder, but there's also a Selective Uninstall. OS2 Warp will also allow you to go back and take these things off later on if you have to make room on your hard disk.
One last thing I want to show you. After system configuration, go ahead and select OK. OS2 will allow you to prune further. Do you want to have all of the fonts or all of the system utilities? What I'd like to do is I'd like to go to the Windows Support, select More, and say, hey, I have Windows installed on my system on my D drive. I want you to use that Windows. Or, a common question I get, David, can I install Windows after I install OS2? Yes, you can. You dual boot to DOS, install Windows, dual boot back to OS2, and then just come here and tell OS2 what partition it's in, and OS2 will now use your Windows. And the last thing I want to point out is you can put your multimedia software, which is 10 megabyte worth of hard disk space, you can put that in another partition as well. So if you're looking for more space on your C drive, when you do the install, put your multimedia out on your D drive or something like that.
Once I've answered these questions and made the choices, then it's just a matter of feeding the diskettes, or even better if it's on CD-ROM, just waiting, I guess.
Watch the data fly. And I always recommend CD-ROM, not just for OS2 Warp, but for any new software. It makes installation so much easier, and it makes it cheaper. It's better for the environment all around it. CD-ROM is a winner.
David, once I've finished the installation, is there anything you'd suggest I do to improve the way my system handles?
Absolutely. First of all, once you're done with an OS2 install and the system is out creating itself, if you will, the tutorial pops up on the screen. Go ahead and take it. The system's busy, but it's not too busy to give you the tutorial. And so it actually lets you do something while the system finishes its install. Remember, OS2 is a real multitasker, so it doesn't have any problem doing that. The next thing you want to do, once you get up and you're running, you want to go to the OS2 system folder here, select System Setup, and look down for the icon marked System. Double-click on that, and take a look at how your screen resolution is set. What that means is my laptop here can do 640 by 480, but I can also choose, do I want it to show 256 colors or 65,000? When Warp installs, it only chooses 256, and it does this with a lot of different video displays. So you want to go and choose a higher resolution, this is the place to do it. And so the first thing you want to do is take a peek, make sure that OS2 is set at the higher resolution. If you have to change the resolution, all you've got to do is make the selection, and then OS2 will tell you to reboot to make those changes take effect.
What about utility diskettes?
Well, the other thing, on this same screen in your System Setup folder is an item that says Create Utility Diskettes. I almost wish we called them emergency diskettes, because that's what they are. If there's a problem and you need to be able to access your system and OS2 won't start up, you can start them up from diskette. And to create those diskettes, double-click on this, Create Utility Diskettes, and it says, tell me which drive you're going to create them on, and I say my A drive, and it'll tell me, put in a new diskette, and by the way, the diskette is going to get erased. Now, what's the difference? On OS2, I can just take the OS2 install diskettes and start from it. What's the difference between that and these utility diskettes? These utility diskettes include configuration data for your CD-ROM device and other devices that you might have, different from the install diskettes. So it's customized for your system, if you will.
So I should create utility diskettes whether I install from CD-ROM or Warp diskette version.
One of the very first things you want to do when you install OS2. The next thing I'd like to tell people about is that in OS2, if you want to add another printer driver, it's not as hard as it first might seem. To do so, all I need to do is go and find my existing printer. It's in the system folder here. Often it's put directly on OS2's desktop. I actually moved mine here. Click with the right mouse button and say, I want to create another printer. It's as simple as that. I want to put it out on my system folder, so I select Create. It says, well, which one of these drivers would you like to use? Well, actually, none of them. I want to install a new printer driver. It brings up a list of all of the many printer drivers that OS2 supports. And here's the list. I select the printer driver, select Install, and OS2 will ask me to go ahead and put in the diskette or the CD-ROM. After that, I tell it which port I want it to connect to. Let's say LPT2. Hit Create, and I've got a new printer on my system. It's really very easy.
Talk me through the steps I would take to add new programs once I've installed OS2 Warp.
Be happy to. One of the things I also want to mention, when I, David Barnes, do an OS2 install, one of the choices is, do you want to add all of the existing programs that are out on your hard disk? When I do an OS2 install, I select no. I like to do it later myself. I like a little more manual control. What Add Programs does is it looks on your hard disk, it finds your programs, DOS, Windows, or OS2 programs, and it looks into a database that's in OS2 to find out how that program runs best under OS2. Let me give you an example of how it works. Select Add Programs. In this case, I want to search for and select the programs to add, so I select OK. I tell OS2 I only want to search for DOS programs on my D drive. For example, I select OK, and OS2 goes off, searches my D drive, finds the programs, and sets up the programs on my desktop so that they run best underneath OS2 Warp.
So it's making recommendations about how it ought to be run.
Absolutely. And once it's done with this, I can select, yes, I want to add these programs and not these programs. And when I select OK, I'll pop the icons in a folder on the desktop, and I'm ready to go.
What it builds is the icon for the program that's already been installed in the normal routine.
That's right. It doesn't change your program. It doesn't change your application. It simply puts what we call a program reference, an icon for the program on OS2's desktop. In the past, we called it Migrate Programs, and it scared people because it sounded like it was going to change my program, right? No, in fact, all it does is adds an icon up on the desktop. Okay?
So here you just select what you want.
That's right. In fact, I don't run many DOS programs. I haven't for years, but here's a couple I do run, WordPerfect 5.1 and FastLink. I go ahead and select OK. Off it goes. Adds these two onto my desktop. It's complete. And when I go back over here to my desktop, I'll find that there is now an icon for them in my DOS programs folders.
Looks simple.
Simple as that.
Thank you. David, what are some of the common questions that IBM gets from people that are trying to install OS2 Warp?
I have to say, we covered a lot of different things, but some of the things that I get very often, David, my hard disk has greater than 1,023 cylinders, and I heard that's not supported underneath OS2 Warp. In fact, it is supported under Warp, but there is a fix pack that you have to apply to get it to support that. What a fix pack is, it's a series of fixes from IBM, and they're all packaged together, and they are free service. You can get them off from different online sources like the internet and bulletin boards, or you can call IBM Service to get it. I want to point out, when you get Warp or Warp Connect, this little piece of paper is important. It's got your serial number on it, which is what you're going to use to call into the IBM Support Center, and it's got the phone number in it for the IBM Support Center. This is where you can acquire a fix pack and instructions on how to apply one. The other question I get quite often is, I've got a 5¼ inch diskette for my A drive. OS2 Warp comes with a 3½ inch diskette. How do I do that install? The instructions to do that are on the fax-back service. So that 1-800-IBM4 fax number, if you call that, you can listen and look at the list, and there's instructions on how to get it on your 5¼ inch machine.
What about how to make diskettes from CD-ROM?
The other thing that a lot of people don't realize is that all of the diskettes for OS2 Warp, the images of these are on the CD-ROM. So if you have an OS2 Warp CD-ROM, your machine doesn't have a CD-ROM drive on it, you can go to a friend's machine and make the diskette images from there so that you can install OS2 from diskette. The instructions to do that are also available through the fax-back service.
So I can take a CD-ROM version of Warp and make a diskette version of it.
Absolutely.
What about disk corruption?
OS2 is very particular about the state of your hard disk. It wants to make sure it's very clean. When I say clean, it means that a check disk has been run and it's corrected all of the problems. To make that work, you stick in the OS2 install diskette and boot your system. When it tells you to put in diskette number 2, you put in diskette number 2. When it's finished with that, you hit F3. It says to exit. Boom, you're at a C://, which we all know from the DOS days. And the command is checkdisk, CHK, DSK, then the drive, space C:/, and then a /F. instructions to do that are in the Getting Started manual, but if you get that corruption message, just know that you have to run a check disk against your drive, and then you can go back and start the install again.
Is there any kind of a reference list for hardware where I can check whether I'm compatible with OS2 Warp?
Absolutely. In fact, it's called the Hardware Compatibility List. We used to put it out in paper. We wasted a lot of paper that way, and so now it's out in electronic form. It's available through the Support Center and the fax-back service, and on most online bulletin boards and on the internet as well.
I know almost every operating system, every program has fixes that come out periodically. How do I get a fix for OS2?
When we find things that are broken, we fix them, and over a period of time, we accumulate those fixes into a fix pack. So to call the Support Center, get the fix pack, and install it on your machine is actually very easy. Once again, the reference card that comes along with OS2 Warp has got information on how to get a hold of the Support Center. You could also download the service pack or fix pack from a bulletin board, and the instructions on how to install it are all in there. But the fix pack is just that. It's an accumulation of fixes.
David, one thing that intrigues me about OS2 Warp is that it can sometimes run DOS applications even better than DOS. How does it do that?
Actually, because of the way that OS2 is an operating system, and we had mentioned before, there's 32-bit things in OS2, like the file system and the memory management, your DOS programs can benefit from that. Now, how do we get the DOS program to run best in that environment? Well, let me show you very quickly how you would optimize your DOS program. I'm going to go into a folder here and pick one. Well, here's an example of something I use, 3D Studio, and it's a very, what's the best way to put it? It's hard on hardware. It wants your system. Well, if I click with the right mouse button and select Settings, it's going to take me into the settings for this individual program. Now, when I select Session here, that's when I notice that it's DOS and it's going to run in a full screen versus a window. When I select DOS Settings, I'm going to select all settings in this environment, in this case. It's going to list for me. These are all of the different things that I can change to make a DOS program run perfect. Now, if you were in DOS, these are the things that would be in your autoexec.bat or your config.sys file. But here, I can set it up for each individual program. Oh, I wish I could do that in DOS. Well, in OS2, you can. A couple of the things that are most important. DPMI memory. Now, here's an example. This is the amount of DOS Protect Mode memory that's available to the application. In this case, I'll take DPMI memory down to 0. I don't need any because I know 3D Studio doesn't use it. But when I go to EMS memory, I know 3D Studio does use it. I want to give it its maximum, so up here you'll notice I give it 32 megabyte. I can take it down to 0. I can take, but wait, I don't have 32 megabyte of memory. Well, in my machine I actually do, but if you did not have 32 megabyte of memory, that's okay. This is virtual. OS2 fools the program to think that it's got it because OS2 does the memory management and actually runs terrific.
I notice for each setting that you choose, a description comes up that says what it is. So that helps me make the choices.
Absolutely. Here's an example. This one here, hardware timer. Set on for games and other time-sensitive applications. Well, that's pretty obvious. My application here is not a game, but it's very much like it. It's very graphics intensive, so I set it on. And you can go back and change these settings, read the text. If it sounds like it applies for your program, go ahead and save it, run the program very quickly, find out how it does, and if it doesn't do well for you, you can go back and change it. You don't have to reboot. This is OS2. This is just a program running under the operating system.
And I don't have to put it in the config.sys file.
No, you don't have to put it in your config.sys.
David, the thing I've heard the most, everyone says is neatest about OS2 Warp is an Internet Access Kit. Could you step me through how we get on the Internet?
Absolutely. Remember, the Internet Access Kit is part of the bonus pack that comes along with OS2. So you install OS2 first, install the bonus pack, and that gets you the Internet Access Kit. To get up and running on the Internet with OS2 Warp is probably the easiest of any environment you've ever been in. And I've tried it on other operating systems. I've tried it with all of those little utilities you buy at the checkout line of your local PC store. None of them can touch OS2 Warp for both functionality and speed. Once you get up installed on OS2, you open up this folder, IBM Internet Connection for OS2. Select, in this case, registration. The first thing you have to do is say, okay, I want to open a personal account. Here's the terms and conditions, which I've never read. But you do want to go ahead and read the terms and conditions. Select OK. Put in your name, address, phone number, credit card information. Select OK, and you're going out on the Internet. Now, wait a minute. It's put in my credit card information. That means I'm paying for it. No. You get 3 free hours on the IBM Global Network. So the first 3 hours are on us. After that, you can use any service provider. You do not have to use IBM as a service provider. You can use any local service provider as well. So wherever you can get the cheapest access, you can use that with OS2 Warp.
So I've got 3 hours to experiment.
Now the dialer appears. This is the IBM Internet Dialer. I go ahead and select Dial. You'll notice that it found my computer, found my modem. If you listen out there, dialing the phone, finds the IBM network. Now I've got to put in my password. I select OK, and I'm connecting to the Internet, and that's it. Now, again, right now I'm using the IBM Global Network to connect. I could be using any service provider. Once you are connected, you can use any of the tools that come along with OS2 Warp. Unlike other operating systems, we come with everything you need to get to the Internet. And this is not just an IBM thing. This is an Internet tool. An example of one of the very best is the Web Explorer that comes with IBM OS2 Warp. Luckily, I have my own web page out on the Internet. And to show you that, I'm going to start up the IBM Web Explorer. It'll load. I'll bring it up full screen so we can see it a little bit better. This is the home icon, so my home page happens to be the page that I created. And so as simple as that, I'm up on the Internet, I've connected, I'm on the David Barnes homepage, and this is where I distribute bitmaps and freeware and shareware and things like that. Here's an example. Well, here's one of my latest bitmaps that I created. I go ahead and click. It downloads it into the Web Explorer. Now, it gets better than this. When I want a copy of this bitmap, all I have to do is drag it while holding the right mouse button, drop it, and now there's a copy on my computer. Pretty neat stuff.
Boy, that's easy.
It gets better. Let's go back over here. Let's say, hey, I'd like to find out how David Barnes created this page on the Internet, because the language that you use to create a web page is really easy. Hold down the Control key, drag, drop, and now I've got a copy of the document that I personally used. So I can go on the Internet, find anybody's web page, and download the information on how they created it. And the last thing that I want to point out about the Web Explorer, which is excellent, is by just a simple drag and drop, I can also get the location of that page. So here, it's a little difficult to read. Let me pull it down. It says David Barnes, bitmap and favorite shareware. If I click twice, there's the address. So I save this in a folder. Tomorrow I want to go back to that location. I drag, I drop, and it takes me back to that location on the Internet. It's very easy to use. One last thing, because this gets better. This gets better. Let's say I'd like to send some mail to one of my friends on the Internet. Just select Navigate, Send Mail. Who do you want to send it to? Type in the text, select Send, and you've now sent Internet mail. And all in one package.
I'm ready to try it. It looks like fun.
It's the easiest way there is to get out and explore the Internet, and it's very inexpensive. All of the great shareware that I mentioned out there, a lot of people are going to like that. www.os2bbs.com. And that's the OS2 Shareware BBS. And all of the things that we mentioned, all of the fixes, all of those other things, they can all be taken off that BBS as well. And my webpage is there with shareware that starts making OS2 even more fun to use.
David, you mentioned shareware, and you hear a lot about freeware. What is it, and where do you get it?
Shareware and freeware, to me, are the greatest software there are. It's created by people, usually on their own time at home. Freeware is opened up to the world. Here it is. Have it. Don't change it, but share it with your friends, and you can all have it free. Shareware is usually try it, and if you like it, after a certain period of time, send me a check. Sometimes it becomes disabled after 30 days. Sometimes it doesn't, 30 or 60 days. Different rules for different pieces of shareware, but it's a great way for software. Try before you buy. Where do you get it? In the OS2 world, there's probably more shareware than on any other operating system platform. Bulletin boards, the internet. On the internet, some of my favorite addresses, if you're going to use FTP, that's the file transfer program, is ftp.cd-rom.com. And that's a CD-ROM that's full of nothing but OS2 shareware. My web page is on www.os2bbs.com, and that's a bulletin board that is nothing but OS2 shareware. Can I show you an example of some of the really neat stuff?
I'd love to see it.
One of my favorites, and I just got it this last week. It's called the NPS Workplace Shell Enhancer, and this is from Japan, and OS2 has quite a following over in Japan, and this is from a Team OS2 person. That means a person that's a dedicated follower of OS2, if you will. What this will allow you to do, in fact, you may even notice right now on my system that some of the things here have a drop shadow on the desktop, like this, and if I open up a folder, the folder will actually have a drop shadow around the edges. Well, this piece of shareware creates that drop shadow, and one of the ways to do that is to simply select how big is the drop shadow going to be. Right over here, do I have a shadow? How big of a shadow? How dark of a shadow? If I want to go ahead and here's a couple of my other favorite things. Let's go to the pointer. This actually should say wrap pointer at screen border. Click that, and notice if I push the mouse off the left side of the screen, it reappears on the right side of the screen. Now, if you're a real power user, that's a very effective feature. Even if you're not a power user, it's a great trick to play on a friend. You put this on their system when they're not looking. Other things that I like quite a bit. Activate window at pointer. Anybody that's ever worked with X Windows, and that's in the Unix environment, they like the ability to notice as I drag this over, I didn't click a mouse button. I simply dragged my pointer over, and whatever is below the pointer comes to the foreground. Right? Again, it's a nice usability feature. Now, you may have also noticed that during the demonstration here, when I opened a window or closed a window, there was some animation that went along with it, and you can select that on this page, whether to have the animations there for all windows or just for folders. If I go in here, there's detailed settings on all of the different animations and what they can be like. So notice as I close this down, and again, these are just nice little features that make it easier to use. Command window. Here's one of my favorites. If you're an OS2 user already, you will truly appreciate this. Let me go to my desktop, click with the right mouse button, select file name. Now, by the way, if you got OS2 Warp, file name's not a menu choice on your pop-up menu. But here, I can simply select the file I want to work with, and when I select the file, OS2 will execute the file or do whatever it is that file is supposed to do. If it's a bitmap, it opens it in my bitmap editor. If it's an executable program, it'll run the program. A quick, easy way to get to things. So I opened a window. I'm going to enter some text. I want to cut that text and put it in OS2's clipboard. I simply drag, release, and it's in the clipboard. If I want to paste it back, click twice, and it's back at the command line. Click with the right mouse button, and I've got new choices. Those things weren't there when I first got OS2, but because of OS2's workplace shell, its interface, the object technology it uses, and because of excellent shareware and freeware, like this extension to the workplace shell, I can make my system do whatever I'd like. Shareware. A lot of people think is, well, that's substandard software. I need the quality stuff from the big companies. Au contraire. Shareware is quality software. It's just as good, it's usually less expensive, and you get to try it before you buy it. So it's actually got an advantage over commercial software, if you will. It's all over the internet. There's shareware out there to do just about anything that you need in OS2.
Looks really interesting.
Makes life fun.
I bet it does. I can
Especially
tell it makes it fun for you.
for geeks like me.
Well, David, I appreciate all the time you spent with me today. I really do thank you for it.
Been a
And
pleasure.
it's nice to get a jump start on what I ought to do to get ready to install Warp, and I can tell from watching you that it does a lot and it's fun. So I'm looking forward to it.
Great.
Thanks again.